franklin.com. And speaking of the aforementioned Andy Schectman, the smartest man in business and in finance that I know, we're going to talk to Andy about something that I teased you with yesterday. I didn't do the story because we ran out of time. IMF issues grave warning the Biden regime on out-of-control deficit spending. The IMF has sounded the alarm on the Biden regime's high deficit spending, warning that its fiscal stance of ballooning public debt threatened to stoke inflation and probably even spark a financial chaos. Andy is live here on the Mike Church Show on the Crusade Radio Network. Andy, welcome back. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
Mike, good to be here, brother. Thanks for having me.
You better believe it. Last time we talked about BRICS, and you gave us a crash course in BRICS. Is this one of the things that could lead to more nations joining BRICS?
Well, of course, it's not lost on our foes. You know, a $34 trillion debt is awful. In fact, well, it's growing. Just from March 1st to March 20th, we saw a $168 billion rise in 20 days to $34,561 billion, on and on and on. We're adding $1 trillion in debt every 90 days. It took over 200 years to do that the first time, and now we're doing it in 90 days. The speed at which the debt is increasing is out of control. But I don't think people might really get how big $1 trillion is, because it's probably true that most of us in a lifetime will earn $1 million. But save it is another question. But, you see all these billionaires all over the place. So these words that end in illion seem to flow off the tongue. But just to put it in perspective, 1 trillion seconds ago, Mike, was 31,688 years ago. You're talking Neanderthals stalking the plains of Europe. So when we try to put this into context, yes, and the IMF is right. It is reaching a point of literally of no return in terms of debt accumulation, and that doesn't include the big numbers. The $34 trillion debt. Yeah, that sounds pretty ridiculous. I get it, but what about Medicaid, which is off the charts right now, and Medicare? I mean, when you talk about Medicaid, or Medicare rather, Part B is the largest liability of the government, $99.5 trillion.
Wow.
Medicare Part D for the prescription drugs will be missing $22.1 trillion and $77 trillion underfunded in Social Security. Then you add government military pensions. When you add the unfunded liabilities, you're talking $175 trillion on top of the $34 trillion. And then you talk about a government where $9 trillion, just about $8.9 trillion, has to be refinanced at higher rates in the next 12 months. And this goes on for the next 11 years based upon the budget projections. And look, I guess I'll say one last thing on this, and I'll let you jump in, and that is the Congressional Budget Office of the United States, which is the last nonpartisan group in Washington, came out, and this is before the 12 million people entered this country illegally. Mm-hmm. Lord knows how we're going to pay for that, schooling, food, healthcare. But they said by 2031, in less than 7 years, 100% of all of the revenue taken in from taxes will go just to pay the interest on the debt and mandatory entitlement spending like Social Security. So ask yourself this question. How can this country remain the dominant military and financial superpower when 100% of discretional spending, which includes military, will need to be borrowed? That's the question that needs to be asked in an environment where these countries like China, Japan, Saudi, Russia, they're all dumping treasuries. So who's going to buy our debt? That's the big question.
And that leaves the Congress in a position of if they want to continue borrowing, well, then, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go Zimbabwe, or you're going to go Weimar Republic, or any other country. You could go current day, which is the one over there in Africa that has the out-of-control inflation and is printing $1 million bills, because that's already begun to happen. I'll give you another stat. David Stockman, just the other day, wrote at LouRockwell.com, if the current scenario continues, okay, the public debt will reach $140 trillion at minimum by 2054, Andy. In turn, that would
Yes.
cause interest payments on the public debt with rates no higher than those which prevail between 86 and 97. Just the interest would skyrocket to $10 trillion per year. Now, you know and I know how they're going to deal with this. You just inflate the currency to commensurate, so it's commensurate with this, which will work on their end, but it won't work on Mike Church's end because a gallon of milk will cost $150.
Well, yeah, and it won't work on everyone else's. People don't understand what they seem to not understand is, I mean, we have a fiscal policy that is so irrational and stupid, where we're spending money that we don't have. We've given $200 billion to the Ukraine, and we're broke. We're insolvent. We're borrowing money to other countries, and it just doesn't work. And at some point, the rest of the world, who has been accumulating dollars because of the petrodollar deal, really, and stockpiling them, creating a synthetic demand since 1973, at some point they're going to say nuts to the dollar. Why would we want to hold a currency from an insolvent and hypocritical country? And look, I'm a patriot. I love this country, Mike, but they look at us as hypocritical. Like Janet Yellen, we've talked a lot about the sanctioning of the Russian assets. Now they're voting, right, I think, tomorrow to confiscate those assets and use them to fund the Ukraine. And in the same breath, Janet Yellen threatens China and says, if you give money to Russia, even though you're allies in the BRICS, well, we'll sanction you, your businesses, your banks, and Beijing itself. And so we can do this, but you can't. And so when you talk about the rest of the world saying, you know what, nuts to the dollar, which is being inflated by a regime that is hypocritical, and let's not forget about the ramifications of the bond market, which, here again, who's buying them? So you end up in a situation where not only does it not work for Mike Church, I don't think it works for the majority of the Southern Hemisphere, and really the majority of the world who begins to understand that this is a path that, as you said, monetization of assets leads to Weimar Republic or much worse.
Andy Schectman is one of the co-founders of our friends at milesfranklin.com, precious metals and other services, and we'll talk a little bit at the end of this interview with Andy about that. Andy, I want to take you back to 2011. There was a hearing in the House of Representatives, and seated at the table was a professor from Princeton University. Her name was Teresa Gardalucci. Seated next to her was your friend and mine, Peter Schiff. And Gardalucci floated the idea that at some point in time, what Congress needed to do was confiscate my IRA, your IRA, and everyone else's, because they knew better what to do with them, and then plow those funds into Social Security. I know it's not on the table, but these clowns have to be thinking that there's a pile of money, you probably know how many trillions it is, in people's and folks' IRAs that are just sitting out there ripe for Congress to take.
Yeah, when that happened, I think there was a $17 trillion debt at the time. It's interesting you bring that up, and a $17 trillion pool of assets in IRAs goes to show you how fast the debt has grown. And while that bill never made it past the House floor, it opened up Pandora's box. There is no question that they understand that. This would be as a tool of, patriotism and an emergency executive order to stabilize what would be a crashing system. And that's exactly right. If the world all of a sudden loses their appetite for treasuries and dollars for whatever reason, now we went into that a little bit last week, and I could, fill 6 or 7 of these episodes talking about why and the probability of that happening. But that would be a stopgap. There is no question about it. And really what they basically said was, if this were to really get severe, yes, we would take everyone's IRAs and convert them into basically an annuity backed by U.S. Treasuries with a guaranteed return by the U.S. government, thank you very much, and a fixed rate, but all done in the name of, the national emergency to stabilize what is a system that is collapsing. So, no, it never passed. But, yeah, it scared me enough, honestly, and I've never really said this publicly, but it scared me enough at the time to cash out my IRAs and pay a $65,000 penalty because I was, at the time, very young. And and then pay the income taxes. So it's a situation that I was wrong in doing it, but I took accountability for the possibility of that happening. I've never looked back, but I do think that is certainly something that they understand and know as a nuclear option, if you will.
Andy, isn't there a precedent for this? Didn't Franklin Delano Roosevelt try and confiscate all the gold in the 1930s?
He did confiscate all the gold in 1933, or as much as was turned in. But you have to understand, back then, it was a different time, a very different time, in the respect that everybody owned gold. Gold was looked at as money. It was currency. Everyone had it. And so, not only that, the idea behind doing it is something that I could see them revaluing the price of gold again. And there is actually a clause that the Federal Reserve has the ability to revalue the price of gold. We've had the head of the Dutch central bank say the exact same thing, where what Roosevelt did is he confiscated gold. The $20 gold coin was the basis of it all. And he would pay basis the $20 gold coin. If you had two tens, it would be the same thing.
Hang on just a second, Andy. This is the Crusade Radio Network. Okay. Continue, please.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, anyway, so he would take that $20 gold coin that people would turn in and pay you $20.54, which was a lot of money back then.
I bet it was.
And then well, it was. And then he devalued the dollar by 40% and made gold worth $35 an ounce. So anyone who hung on to it instantly made 40% on their gold. But you have the head of the Dutch National Bank. It's funny, actually. All of the gold held on central bank balance sheets right now, Mike, all of it, is held in an account called the gold revaluation account.
Okay.
And they understand that by revaluing gold, it would make their liabilities on the other side of the balance sheet much better. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know that history will repeat itself. It may rhyme, but it is not something that I put past the realms of possibility.
Okay, so last time I talked to you, Andy Schectman of MilesFranklin.com, I brought this up, and we ran out of time, so no, I said I was going to ask you again. Maybe you remember, maybe you don't. I told you about my old friend, Mr. Louis Lehrman. Louis Lehrman has spent his life since August the 18th, 1971, I want to say is the date that Nixon took us off the gold standard, spent the rest of his life trying to get us back on it. And one of the last times I talked, he wrote a book about a return to the gold standard. Last time I talked to Mr. Lehrman, I asked him, I said, but if gold is $2,000 an ounce, Mr. Lehrman, I think it was $1,200 at the time, I said, that's not very practical. How would we go back to the gold standard? And he said very simply, Congress would just set a date certain, and they would say on this date, an ounce of gold is going to be valued by the United States Treasury at $32 an ounce, or whatever the number is, and then that's a path back to the gold standard. Do you agree? Could it be done?
I think it would go the other way via the gold revaluation account. I do think it is. In fact, I think ultimately you will see gold backing a new system. Look, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the most powerful bank on the planet, in 2019 quietly, and Google this, most people don't even know this, but they quietly revalued gold as the world's only other Tier 1 reserve asset, next to U.S. dollars and treasuries. The central banks have been buying more at any time in history. I think it will go the other way. They won't, in my mind, say it's worth $32 an ounce. What I think they would do is revalue the price much, much, much higher, and marry the gold market to blockchain to show the immutability and the veracity, rather than making it convertible, where you could convert your new currency into gold. Because Charles de Gaulle from France, who drained all of the gold, as you mentioned, when Nixon closed the gold window in 71, because of it, he proved that convertible currencies convert. So instead, you use blockchain to show the immutability and the veracity of what you're pegging to the system, backing a new currency and a new system. And the way that they do it in order to maintain monetary flexibility would be, let's say you put gold at $10,000 an ounce, whatever the number is. You take 20% of every new currency unit and peg it to gold. So you still have monetary latitude with that other 80% to, either increase the money supply or to do things that, in a monetary perspective, that the Federal Reserve likes to do. Yet the tether holding it down is that 20% pegging to gold at a fixed rate. This is why guys like Jim Sinclair, who was known as Mr. Gold in the 70s, said, at some point gold will reach a level like $10,000. It will be pegged to a new system. and it will never come back down. And I couldn't agree more. When you piss in the punch bowl enough, Mike, there's no way you get people to ever drink it ever again. And I think that's exactly the idea here, is that gold has to be used to show legitimacy. And why else would the most influential bank on the planet, the biggest, most secure, the central bank, why would they reclassify gold as the only other tier one? And why would the central banks be buying it at a level the world's never seen? I think there's big things in store for gold, and I think it has to do with connecting it to a new system for sure.
And there's Andy Schectman of milesfranklin.com on our Dude Maker hotline here. You know, I remember, because I'm old, Andy, I've been at this for 33 years, so I remember things that most people don't remember. And I remember back during the early days of the Obama regime, maybe it was after the porculus succubus stimulus passed, I forget what the trigger was, but there was some trigger, and I remember this clearly. I remember the University of Texas sending like an armored car battalion or whatever to a bank in New York to go get their alumni, their endowment. And it wasn't just Texas; it was Harvard and a couple other universities had taken the cash, dollar bills, and had converted them all into gold, and they had stored them at some place in New York, and they went to go get them to move them because they didn't trust the people that were. You obviously know the story.
Yeah, I believe the guy that ran that fund, I think his name was Mark Bass. I'm pretty sure.
That's it.
But anyways, yeah, they invested in GLD, which is the ETF. But because the prospectus of the GLD ETF, which is one of the most nefarious things I've ever seen, people own GLD. I implore you to read pages 6 through 12 titled Risk Factors. And by the way, you know, just so everyone knows, Mike and I did not discuss any of this. This is something that has always been a real sore spot with me, and that's GLD.
That's right.
Anyways, Mr. Bass was smart enough. And by the way, pages 6 through 12, Risk Factors. Read it. You'll sell your GLD and SLD tomorrow. Anyways, he was smart enough, or is smart enough as an advisor, to know that the little guy like us can never take possession of the metal in GLD or SLD. But if you, I think he spent $1 billion on the Texas school fund or the university fund, and that's a basket. He bought so much that he was able to take possession of the gold outside of GLD, and he did it the right way. And I think his skepticism of it really being there is 100% well-founded. So, yeah, what he did was really, I think, what gold stands for, and that is he took possession of it because gold and silver are some of the only assets on the planet that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. There's no counterparty risk. And I'll tell you, in my mind, counterparty risk will become a very ugly phrase over the next coming months and years as this unwinds.
It is, and I remember that story, and I remember going, and I remember thinking that he wants the actual metal. He doesn't want a promissory note from a broker or whatever that says, "Here, we'll honor this." No, he goes, "No, dude, give me I want the metal." And so,
Yep.
It was billions. It was billions at the time. Imagine what it's worth today. All right, final question for Andy Schectman. Now, by the way, Andy, can Miles Franklin help people convert their GLD into actual metal?
We can help people do all sorts of those things, whether it be IRAs, 401ks. If you have a GLD or SLD or any of the ETFs, we can help you with that. Absolutely. And the best way to reach out to us, we do have a website that offers limited purchasing ability, but to get our price list that we hold close to the vest, that will be as good or better than anyone in North America, or any questions that you heard here answered or that are burning a hole through your mind that you want to get answered, send us an email at info@milesfranklin.com or just ask for the price list, which will be much better than what you see on our website. And say Mike Church sent me, and we will make sure that your people get, I promise you, the red carpet treatment. And that'll be the best way to reach out to us.
Okay.
info@milesfranklin.com.
info@milesfranklin.com. Maggie will put that up in the chat room, and we'll put it up on the website as well. And I wanted to squeeze a question. I only have a minute and a half left here. I've been doing what's called, there are tens of millions of Americans do. It's called dollar cost averaging, right? You buy shares in a mutual fund, for example, through Edward Jones. In my case, it's David Simpson, my broker friend. And you don't worry about what the price is because you just assume it's always going to, in the long run, it grows and it's going to keep up. Is there a way to do dollar cost averaging for silver or gold?
Absolutely. And I think that's the best way to do it. When I started my company 34 years ago, I was 19 years old. My father said, "You'll buy something every 2 weeks or I'll fire you." Now I've honored my promise to him. I've owned the company for 2 decades. He won't fire me anymore, but I have bought every 2 weeks for 34 years. And as a result, I look at gold and silver as money, as wealth, not as an investment. But it is certainly the best way to smooth out the uncertainty curve. I highly suggest cost averaging is one of the most efficient ways of accumulating any asset over time. Absolutely. You let the laws of compounding work for you instead of against you.
Okay. Well, you're going to get an email from me. It's the first one you're going to get. And you and I are going to talk about this. All right. Andy Schectman, milesfranklin.com, fountain of information. I can't wait to talk to you some more finance. And again, brother, you're one of the wisest and most well-informed guys out there in this. Thank you so much for your time. We'll talk soon, brother.
Look forward to it, Mike. You and everyone else. Stay well.
All right. Thank you very much. That's Andy Schectman of milesfranklin.com. Again, the email address. Fill his email box up. Just ask him questions. info@milesfranklin.com. info@milesfranklin.com. Isn't it refreshing, and doesn't it just make you feel just a little bit better that we're not all screwed? That there is a way that we can try and protect ourselves from what these irresponsible, feckless bastards are doing with all of these bailouts and this funding of never-ending wars and all of it. It all goes together, folks. 1 hour left to go. Speaking of going together, don't miss it.